All rise, veuillez vous lever. The International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals is now in session. L'audience du mécanisme international appelé à exercer la fonction résiduelle des tribunaux pénaux est ouverte. Please be seated.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Mr. Kabuga. I'm pleased to see you in attendance this afternoon. I'm conducting this hearing from the mechanism in The Hague. My colleagues, Judge El-Baj and Judge de Guzman, are participating via video conference link. This hearing is being held within 120 days of the last hearing on the 13th of December 2023, in line with the trial chamber's order of 8 September that indefinitely stayed the proceedings. Counsel are in attendance for prosecution and defence. May I now take the appearances of counsel? First of all, for the prosecution.
Good afternoon, Your Honours. For the prosecution, Ms. Maria Yakusheva, Mr. Thomas Logel, and myself, Mr. Rashid.
Thank you, Mr. Rashid. And for the defence?
Good morning, Your Honour. For the defence, you have Mrs. Ayadi, and I'm myself, Mr. Alted.
Kabuga himself has chosen today to appear by video conference link. The chamber recognises the particular problems he does face when questions of concentration do arise, and he is clearly represented on this occasion by Maître Altit, should the occasion arise towards the end of the proceedings and he wishes to take the opportunity of making personal comments, then I will give him that opportunity, and I rely on you, Maître Altit, to remain in communication with the video conference room so that that can happen if he wishes. It's also been confirmed to me that Mr. Kabuga is receiving interpretation of these proceedings in Kinyarwanda. The purpose of today's hearing is to allow the parties to raise matters concerning Mr. Kabuga's health and detention, and for the trial chamber to hear from the defence on its progress in relation to identifying an appropriate and willing state to which Mr. Kabuga might be granted provisional release. In this respect, the trial chamber in its decision of 7th August 2023, the appeals chamber in its decision of 7th August 2023 instructed the trial chamber to expeditiously address the issue of Mr. Kabuga's detention on remand and consider appropriate modalities and conditions for his release. I also wish to note that yesterday, the parties and I, along with representatives of the registry, had a case management meeting to focus the discussion at today's status conference. I now provide a procedural update. Prior to hearing from the parties, I outline what has happened in the period since the last status conference. On the 23rd of December, the defence filed a confidential motion requesting that the trial chamber issue an order to a state to accept Mr. Kabuga as a provisionally released accused pursuant to Article 28 of the statute. On 18th January, the trial chamber issued a confidential order for submissions to that state, as well as to the Netherlands as the host country. That's a requirement of Rule 68B. On 7th February, the state to which Mr. Kabuga requested to be provisionally released responded that Article 28 does not apply and that it otherwise refused to accept him. The Netherlands, for its part, stated that while it had no objection to Mr. Kabuga's provisional release, he cannot be released onto its territory as he has no right to reside in the Netherlands. On 29th February, the trial chamber issued a confidential decision in which it denied the motion on the basis that Article 28 does not give it the authority to compel a state to accept Mr. Kabuga onto its territory as a provisionally released accused over its refusal. In so doing, the trial chamber emphasized that the mechanism must rely on the voluntary cooperation of member states to find an acceptable solution and effectuate Mr. Kabuga's release as envisaged by the appeals chamber. On the 15th of February, the trial chamber also issued a separate order in the interest of transparency to file on the record a submission received by the registry from the Ministry of Justice of Rwanda, indicating that Rwanda is a willing and appropriate destination for Mr. Kabuga's provisional release. In issuing this order, the trial chamber noted that it would not presently consider the submission since Mr. Kabuga's provisional release to Rwanda is not currently a live issue before the trial chamber, and the Rwandan government is not a party to these proceedings. The trial chamber also noted that Rwanda would be heard at the appropriate time if and when the matter properly arises. And lastly, in this procedural update, I note that the registrar's decision regarding Mr. Kabuga's indigency was discussed at the previous status conference, namely his determination that Mr. Kabuga is not indigent and is capable of funding his entire defence. In that decision, however, the registrar stated that this determination is subject to the attribution of frozen funds and property to Mr. Kabuga, which he presently cannot access. In that regard, the trial chamber issued a confidential order for submissions on 26 February, in which it requested that the registrar file a submission responding to several questions that will hopefully assist in determining the realistic feasibility and the most effective method of recovering the substantial cost of Mr. Kabuga's legal expenses from the assets attributed to him. The registrar's submission falls to be filed in the first half of April. Now that completes the procedural update, but it is a suitable point at which to ask the representative of the registrar present in court today whether the timing indicated is likely to be met. In other words, whether it is envisaged that a timely submission on behalf of the registrar will be presented to the trial chamber. Mr. Hicks.
Good afternoon, Judge Bonamy. Good afternoon, Your Honors, colleagues in the courtroom. Brent Hicks here on behalf of the Registrar. I can be brief, Your Honor. The short answer is yes, a timely submission by the Registry is certainly anticipated.
Thank you very much. The Chamber is concerned that giving effect to the instructions it received from the Appeals Chamber is taking time, and we are conscious of the need for dealing with this matter as expeditiously as possible, and therefore we are pleased to hear confirmation that that submission should be timelessly presented to the Chamber. I now want to turn to the question of provisional release itself. The defence has now filed 12 progress reports on its efforts to secure Mr. Kabuga's provisional release. The trial chamber once again commends Maître Altit and his team for all of the work it has undertaken in relation to this matter. However, as mentioned above, the trial chamber denied the defence's motion seeking an Article 28 order to Mr. Kabuga's primary provisional release destination. And the most recent progress reports informed the trial chamber that its secondary option has also refused to accept Mr. Kabuga onto its territory. Maître Altit, I turn to you now. Could you now please update the trial chamber on your current efforts, as well as your anticipated next steps in relation to Mr. Kabuga's provisional release, including applicable timeframes so far as you can for each of these steps? It may be appropriate to go into private session while you do this, and if so, if that's your wish, then it will be granted.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Your Honor. We can go into private session, please.
Well, we will go into private session.
Nous allons.
Because of the sensitive and confidential nature of the information which will be discussed.
We're now in open session, Your Honour.
The members of the public who are in attendance here should know that while you've been unable to follow part of the proceedings, there has been a very active debate about various possibilities in relation to the provisional release of Mr. Kabuga. In relation to the first two raised by Maître Altit, the Chamber will make orders giving a certain time within which the Chamber expects to be updated on the proceedings, on the stage of proceedings with two separate European states to which an application has been made. In relation to the third and fourth options that were presented as possibilities to the Chamber, these are in a very early stage of consideration by the defence, and an indication has been given to Maître Altit that before they can seriously feature in the court's consideration of options for release, a much more specific information is required about the possibility of these working and also about the timescale. And for the moment, it's been made clear also that in the event that none of these options makes much progress in the fairly near future, the Chamber itself will have to consider its own initiative to find a state that might be willing to accept Mr. Kabuga on provisional release. I hope that's a fair summary of the discussion that took place out with your presence. Now that takes me to the issue of health, and associated with the health of Mr. Kabuga, the detention conditions, the circumstances of his detention. Now, Maître Altit, is there anything you want to submit in relation to these aspects of the case?
Maître Altit, thank you, Your Honor. Concerning the detention conditions, from our point of view, they are good because much attention is paid to Mr. Kabuga. He is supported, he's supported as much as possible, and in a very professional way, and this is an excellent thing. I already said that during the last hearing, and I said that we were highly satisfied with the way things were going on from that point of view. Regarding his health conditions, if you allow me, Your Honor, I think it would be more appropriate to discuss that in a private meeting.
We're now in open session, Your Honor.
Thank you. Mr. Rashid.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, as I was saying, these are just observations on our side in terms of the issue of Mr. Kabuga's provisional release and the efforts being made by the defense. For our side, the process cannot go on forever. It has to reach an end. I think we've all read the decision of the appeals chamber in this regard, and Your Honor reiterated that today, earlier on, about the need for this effort to go quickly. And we, of course, would like to see it move quicker as well. In terms of the decisions or the cases that Mr. Altit referenced earlier, I believe that was in open session when he did that. It wasn't.
No, I don't think it was. But
I won't say much, Your Honor, just to summarize. Obviously, that is a different institution with different rules. Also, it has a more of a permanent presence where it is. Whereas as well, we all know that we are an ad hoc institution that probably has slightly more stricter ways of dealing with provisional release requests and these possibilities of creating premises that are an extension of the institution. So that's what we wanted to say in regard to that. The other issue, I think, is in terms of the efforts being made to apply for the residency or the resident status in the locations that were identified. those applications we believe can still continue while a provisional release, a realistic provisional release location is found. And if Mr. Kabuga were to succeed in gaining a resident status in one of these locations, then obviously he can merrily go there from the place where he is provisionally released if your honours agree to that arrangement to take place. I think that's our observations in terms of the issues raised today, Your Honour. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Rashid. These comments are noted. And one thing I think that ought to be said publicly, Maître Altit, is that when we were in private session a short time ago, your comments about the health condition of Mr. Kabuga involved no complaints of any kind, and indeed your comments about the detention conditions were all complimentary towards the institution. I hope I reflect accurately the nature of your comments. Thank you. Now, do you think that Mr. Kabuga may wish to say anything personally?
Je ne crois pas, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Altit, I don't think so, Your Honor. He listened with great interest. I believe you have noted that he's very tired. Sometimes he looked very tired during the hearing, but he made his best to hear what was said here. But I don't think he has anything to say.
Assistant who's with him?
Oui.
Yes, Your Honor. We talked to him a few minutes ago.
Now, unless there are any omissions in what we've addressed, I think that concludes the business for this status conference. These will continue, these status conferences will inevitably continue, and the next one will be sometime in the month of July, I anticipate. If it's possible to give quite early notice of the date for that in due course, that will be done, because I suspect it's helpful at that time of the year to know more specifically when events are likely to occur. I'm grateful, as are my colleagues, to counsel for the prosecution and to counsel for the defence, and for the assistance that's been provided in this hearing, which is now adjourned.
All rise, veuillez vous lever.